Hey, we live in a world where you cannot use words like patriot, constitution, freedom, or even America without being accused of being a fascist, insurrectionist, or traitor. You fill in the adjective. It makes you one big bully. You are the great oppressor. We're living in an age where the oppressed, or at least those with a perceived sense of oppression, determine the rules of engagement. You cannot have a conversation without being penalized or marginalized, because even a slip of the lip is going to get you hung by the tongue. We aren't allowed to speak in the platitude of being superior or great without fear of somehow offending those that believe themselves, or at least the world around them, to be oppressed. We can't even speak accurately of historic narratives because someone in history had to be oppressed in order for those, just for the stories to be written. Oppression is now a badge of honor. If you can claim to be oppressed, then you're also claiming to be faultless and without guilt. Some of those who might claim an ancestry of slavery refuse to own their own ancestral guilt and their own forefathers' participation in such a barbaric tragedy. Because, yes, to tell the full narrative of history reminds us that even those who were at some point in time oppressed were at another point in time equally the oppressors. The oppression of blacks, for instance, in America must indeed necessitate the original starting point of the blacks who sold them off in the first place. See where I'm going with that? History's ugly, folks, and everyone in it is guilty for the times in which they lived. You and I can only be held accountable for the times in which we live, the today over which we've been made stewards. Now, my responsibility towards yesterday is to learn from it and not to repeat its mistakes. It's not my responsibility to make up for its sins. No generation is capable of that. That's a Herculean feat. Now, any advancement of human history has, by its very nature, required the oppression of certain peoples. That's just human nature. That is the reality of history. Just ask the Sumerians, the ancient Egyptians, ancient and imperial China, the Mayans, the Greeks, the Romans. They have all been oppressors. Which of their victories over weaker peoples would you like to take responsibility for? Unless you're building a time machine and taking an army to destroy those oppressors, there's literally nothing you can do about the past. And even if you could, there's a good chance you may just destroy your very own lineage. See where I'm going with that one? Yeah. Now I digress. While we have spent a generation in self-flagellation reminding ourselves that America was built on the backs of the oppressed and that we oppressed and displaced people in order to have what we now have, we have now taken on the very nature of the oppressed offendedness and thin-skinned victimhood, which means if we don't reel that shit in real quick, we're about to really and actually be oppressed by peoples that haven't bought into the whole woke, be nice, socially distant, save grandma agenda. But we have to remember the people we've oppressed and make reparations for those we've displaced. That usually comes from someone who's posting underneath a profile picture that contains a lower third caption telling the world about the greatness of the white man's medicine and vaccine. People have gotten soft, folks. So while the Russians and the Chinese trained their men for hardships, we're holding training sessions and shooting off memos regarding gender roles and greater understanding. CNN spent 2 years with a death counter on the screen telling us how many people died from COVID. Now they've replaced it with the Ukrainian death toll. Why must we always be reminded that someone somewhere is always dying a needless, senseless, and probably oppressed death? Forget the fact that it's happened throughout human history. Now we need to be reminded that innocent people are suffering at the hands of mean people, and we need to justify our first world comfortable existence by changing our profile picture to a flag or a color. Aren't we so nice and understanding? We can't even fire off a harsh text message without adding LOL so as to soften the blow. Everyone wants to be oppressed these days because, like the aforementioned mighty nations, the way to perceived power is now through being woke and thus being weak. But are we really weak? Well, it all depends on if you're capable of canceling people, right? Or deplatforming, demonetizing, whatever. The way to the top is these days seeing how far down at the bottom you can prove yourself to be. How can we be the lowest, most marginalized subset of the smallest subcategory of people on earth? Woe is me. This is the power of being weak. The way up is down. This is the power of being nothing and accomplishing nothing because, let's face it, I could have been great if I hadn't been born into an oppressive world with all of my many problems and insurmountable issues. If it hadn't been for you cisgendered, hetero, patriarcho-normative, white man-spreading, splaining dead namers, I could have been successful in life. But instead, I'm doomed to be misunderstood forever, and for that, you owe me. Launch the nukes now, Vladimir. We are screwed.